Hello, it's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, welcoming you to another podcast, and really super pleased to have Sean McCormack with me today. Known him for a long time, and last June, very fortunate to have the Veterinary Green discussion forum happening in London, and when that finished, I'd arranged with Sean to go over to a site where he has released beavers for the first time in 400 years into this capital, into London. We know beavers are coming back in various places in the UK through reintroductions and so on. But these are the first ones that are in the capital. And Sean said, to be honest, they're really, really difficult to see. We are unlikely to see them, but I can show you all the damage, or the good damage that they're doing to the trees and the area where they're housed and so on. What, it's a dray with a
The lodge.
a lodge
Yeah.
a lodge with a dray's a squirrel, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. You get your rodents mixed up.
Yes, exactly. And anyway, we ended up wandering around. We went into a bit of a thicket, and then sure enough, we got the Midas touch that I sometimes think I have with these things. We saw the kits and the big mama, who's about the size of a Cocker Spaniel, the second biggest rodent in the world. So there I was with this amazing vet who has also been on Spring Watch, Nature Watch, known you for a long time, Sean. And I think we have done a podcast, maybe in the deep and distant, or have we not?
I think we did in the very early days of this podcast. Maybe we
Yeah.
did.
But it's so amazing to have you on. You're a huge inspiration to me in lots of different areas. Obviously, early days, we did a lot of webinars with you on exotics.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about your career and things. But for those who perhaps don't know you, maybe listening in other countries as well, tell us a little bit about yourself, apart from you being a beaver adopted parent, I suppose we can call you.
Yeah, I'm not even a beaver daddy now. I'm a beaver granddaddy because they've had babies. So yeah, before beavers, which seems like another period of my life because it's all become about beavers lately. I studied animal science, was my first degree, and then I went into veterinary medicine as a graduate. So I studied over here in Essex in the UK, and then went back to my homeland to Dublin to study veterinary medicine. And I guess all along there was a desire to mix kind of nature and wildlife and veterinary together. When I was a youngster, from a tiny young age, basically adults asked me what you want to be when you grow up, and knew I was absolutely animal mad and into the natural world. I said a zookeeper or a vet because those were the only two animal jobs I knew. And I ended up becoming a zoo vet and an exotics vet. And long story short, I suppose, is that I went down a fairly traditional route. Some zoos on our books in various practices, a lot of domestic and exotic pets as well. And yeah, long story short, after about 6 years of clinical practice, I sort of started, getting itchy feet, but also really started analyzing kind of what I wanted from life, and the full-time clinical veterinary merry-go-round in a clinical setting. I just thought I can't do this till I retire, and I was facing burnout, and my mental health wasn't great. I started getting stomach problems. I went to the doctor, and the doctor said this isn't stomach, it's head, and it's stress related. And that kind of prompted me to go, okay, what do I really want to do? What am I passionate about? How do I re-identify myself? If I'm not a vet, if I leave veterinary entirely, what would I be? Because our identities get wrapped up in that, working towards that goal from such a young age. And yeah, I've managed to come out on the other side with a fairly balanced career where I'm still using my vet degree. I work in industry and I run a conservation group, and I've got massively involved in the kind of rewilding side of things and species reintroductions, which I'm sure we'll get onto. So it's a pretty balanced career. It's a portfolio career now, and I'm spinning a lot of plates, but I'm happier than I ever was in my career, really.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I practiced for a bit longer than you, for about 26 years, and then the last I'm 35 years qualified in July, so the last 9 years I've obviously been doing a lot with Webinar Vet, with the environmental stuff that I'm really passionate about. You can't run a veterinary practice or indeed a food company if there's no planet. So we've got to start looking at that as well. But I think you're right. It's people will say to me, "Well, you're not a vet anymore." And actually, when you want to be a vet from when you're 8 and you're still kind of in the field, I think it's still quite reasonable to call yourself a vet. Or a vet isn't just somebody who practices, are they? That's I think it for me, it's very much been a vocational thing from when I was 8. My friend accidentally stood on a baby sparrow, killed it, and I said, "Well, if I'd have been a vet, I could have saved that." And I can't really remember after that. Other things come to mind, but basically, it was always wanting to be a vet. And it sounds like you, from an early age, had that kind of saying.
Yeah, it is vocational, and I think we need to turn it on its head a little bit, and from maybe pre-university, we need to turn it on its head that actually being a vet is many more things than
Yeah.
sitting, standing in a often, windowless consultation room, inviting in a carousel of people and their pets and their problems, and 10-minute consultations and operating out the back. A lot of the problems that the veterinary industry has, and a lot of the problems relating to mental health within the profession, and we all know that we're one of the highest rates of suicide of any profession. I think a lot of that relates to this pressure we put on ourselves that there's only one version of being a vet. And more the veterinary community is talking about us being the kind of gurus of or guardians of One Health, where we're talking about pets, planet, people, animals in general, food production animals as well. It's all interlinked, and I think we've got a very unique set of skills to be solving lots of other problems the planet faces, not just what pets face in this clinic or what farm animals face in this clinic. It's all linked to planet health. So I would see myself very much as still being a vet,
Yeah.
and you don't have to be working in clinics full time to still be a vet.
It's interesting. We'll obviously talk a bit about the industry role in a bit, but I know you've done some work also with the BBC with Autumn and Spring Watch.
Yeah.
How did they perceive you, and how perhaps was that connection made in the first place?
It's a tricky one because you actually do get pigeonholed.
Mm.
In some respects, TV producers and things have said to me, it's a real asset that you're a vet, and that's a real USP for you, especially in the nature sector, because it does still come with a bit of trust and authority from and a sense from the public that you know what you're talking about if you're a vet.
Yeah.
We can get into the flip sides that there can be a bit of backlash and a bit of negativity around vets as well. But in some respects, it's been seen as an asset. In other ways, it's been an obstacle to me in terms of getting my kind of nature and wildlife messaging out to a wider audience, because people don't get the fact that, oh, he wants to present on a topic that isn't veterinary related. What do you mean he wants to talk about like a species of bird or something like that? It's like you can be many things. And I was a naturalist before I was ever even thinking about becoming a vet. I was turning over stones and looking at bugs when I was 2 and 3 years old, and I was
Mm.
fascinated with nature and the world around me, flora and fauna. I had a stint as a career as a garden designer. I paid my way through vet school. My living costs was paid by having a garden design business on the side. So there's lots of things that are all about nature, and veterinary is just one element. So in the media space, sometimes it can be a hindrance and sometimes it can be an advantage.
Mm. What's been your best story or little anecdote that you can tell us about that kind of whole experience? Is that there presumably is a lot of standing around as well, but we're used to that as bird watchers and as animal watchers. Things don't always fall into your lap today.
They don't. Anecdotes. I think the old adage of like never work with animals or children definitely holds true. So I was on a BBC program called it was a CBeebies program called Teeny Tiny Creatures, and we were showing a group of kids from like 3 to 8 years old the Harvest Mouse reintroduction project that I run, and trying to put little tiny mice in children's hands to release them back into the wild doesn't always go as planned.
Yeah.
The 3-year-old went and like dived on a mouse in the meadow. It's like, you're gonna crush it. So we had to be very careful around that. So yeah,
Yes.
there's plenty of stories, but yeah, it's an interesting industry. I find it quite fun. I didn't get into it like on purpose. It just kind of happened through having a presence on social media and talking passionately about what I'm passionate about, and just opportunities came my way and I took them. So it's an interesting industry. It's also quite a fickle industry. You know, you can't rely on it to pay the mortgage basically, because it could be flavor of the month one month with several jobs on, and then nothing for another 6 months. So
Yeah.
I kind of take it as it comes.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, but it is interesting what you said about if you're passionate about something, if you put a lot of energy out, then I think you do. I definitely believe in that power of attraction, that people are drawn to you, the right sort of people. You know, I've had certainly some of that with the Veterinary Green Discussion Forum, where if you put yourself out, suddenly you are meeting people that will help with that kind of movement of making sure that, you know, the vets and the veterinary industry is seen as part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I'm not from the UK, obviously I'm from Ireland, and I moved over here twice now, and I'm a big believer in like building community and building a village around you wherever you live. And I think, yeah, once you start putting out something, you do attract like-minded people, and you can grow a bit of a movement, and that's very empowering when we're living in a time of eco anxiety, and the news cycle is doom and gloom. And you know, if you care about the planet, you know, we're not living in a very positive time. So I think attracting that community, getting involved, doing something local, you know, even for big global issues, if you can do something small and local with like-minded people, there's a real tonic in that, and there's a real positive, you know, well-being effect in being active in that space.
Sean, you said that, you know, it's not a positive time. Are you hopeful?
I am. I'll correct that. I think it's an extremely positive time, but I think we're on this weird kind of precipice now, and things need to happen. I am very hopeful, and I'm very optimistic that things are going to turn and things are going to go in the right direction. What I'm just saying is that, you know, the society we live in, and certainly the media kind of
Yeah,
atmosphere, we're bombarded constantly with the doom and gloom messages. And I think we actively have to try and turn that around and
yeah,
start celebrating the hopeful and positive messages. And we have to talk about climate change and the biodiversity crisis, the whole nature crisis in general, in positive, hopeful ways. Because if you just throw the negativity and the
yeah,
doom stories at people, they switch off. I was at the Wetland Centre where you had the Green Forum last year. I was there last week. I was asked to do a keynote speech and some workshops for the Youth London Climate Conference. And it was amazingly hopeful and optimistic and inspiring, actually, to listen to young people, 15 and 16-year-old students from across London, lots of different kind of demographic schools, some very affluent, some not so much, lots of ethnic diversity and socioeconomic diversity in the room. And I was blown away. Like, I nearly had a tear in my eye at a couple of stages where I was listening to these young, passionate people who care about the planet. And I just thought, actually, if this is what we're working with for the next generation, the planet is in good hands, you know? So I think there is a lot of hope.
and we only need small numbers of people, because my feeling at the moment is that within the veterinary profession that it's still kind of the early adopters. You know, we're all bothered about it and a bit concerned, but you know, if that paralyzes us a bit, I think the most important thing with the hope is hope actually usually then breeds action. You know, you've done it with the beavers, you've done it lots of things. I on the same day went out and we were spotting and listening to bats with our bat detectors, which was very, very exciting. And I think you had a huge number of people who are interested in that. And I think if you can get people interested in nature, then the next step is they obviously say, well, how do I kind of protect that? It is most of this around kind of the environmental crisis is education, isn't it? Education, you know, from CEO level right down to kind of, you know, nursery kids, you know, well, treat that harvest mouse, you know, gently. Don't be kind of chucking it or whatever. It's animal welfare. It's, you know, no to cruelty and all those things, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it is education, but I think for a long time, educational part of it has sometimes been a bit like, we're up here telling you down there
Yeah,
what you should be doing. And I think that switches people off. So I think it's education and empowerment as well. So if you give people agency and give people the power to come along and do things with you,
yeah,
or to do it for yourselves, that grows a much more powerful movement because people feel part of it, you know. And we saw that with, you know, the harvest mouse reintroduction, we put people at the heart of it and said, come along and release a mouse back to the
Yeah.
wild, sponsor your mouse and release it back into the wild. And it was interesting at the youth climate conference last week, they were talking about power, and they asked, put up your hand if you think power is something positive or something desirable. And people were very afraid to put up their hand. And a few students put up their hand and came up and talked about why they said, yes, power is desirable, power is positive. And they said, if we don't have power, we don't have agency. And actually, power in the right hands is a really, really positive thing. We just associate power with the power hungry, capitalistic, greedy,
Yeah.
short-term gain type governments and leaders that we have, in the media, in politics right now. But actually, power is something that everyone has, and we
Yeah.
make consumer decisions. That's powerful. We
Yes.
make daily decisions in our lifestyles that are powerful. And although the kind of systems we live in often place blame at the individual, like, you shouldn't fly on holiday for 2 weeks of the year, to get away from your stressful job, or you eat meat and veganism is the answer, or you drive a car.
Yeah.
We're all kind of facing these individual kind of blame finger waggy points, but actually they're important, but systemic change is important. And five of the biggest global corporations account for the vast majority of carbon emissions in the world. And actually placing the blame at the individual is a very handy kind of Orwellian trick to say it's all you guys.
We know who created the term, the carbon footprint, don't we?
We do, yeah. Big oil.
It was big oil. It was Mr. Exxon, I believe.
That's right, yeah.
And actually, I love that idea of the sustainability handprint. Because yes, of course, I drive a car. We travel, etc., etc. But there's also a lot of powerful stuff that we're doing as individuals. I've got solar panels on my roof. The last few days, I've been exporting energy into the grid rather than taking it out.
Great, yeah.
Makes us more resilient. We're less reliant on dictatorships, in far off lands. And we feel like we're doing something positive, and we're not going to get everything right. But if we're trying our best to move in the right direction, then that has to be better than falling into the pit of despair. It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we can all do things, and I think, yeah, tapping into stuff that's local, that's actionable, achievable, and tapping into communities that are doing good is a really powerful way to take back control and take back power. Yeah.
And I love that what you did with the bats, and it is the storytelling.
It is.
You are a fount of not all knowledge, but a lot of knowledge. So you're always really very interesting to listen to, and I think it's being able to engage people and show them the possibilities and also the dangers that if we don't look after it, we are going to lose it. So it's that balance of talking about some of the things that are happening that are not good, but still being able to say, but look at the positive stuff you're doing with the beavers, the mice, etc., the adders, which I know you also look after. You also look after keep an eye on the adders. I'm threatening to come down and hopefully spot these adders one day.
You've been threatening that now for several years, Anthony. I need to get you down. The time is ticking. It's adder season.
The time is now.
Yeah, the time is now for adders. Yeah.
Brilliant. And talk to us a little bit then. We've talked generally there, but obviously I know you work for Tails.com, who I think were very, if not the first, one of the first into personalized feeding. Obviously also, an environmentalist. Is there a danger that with our pets we're anthropomorphizing them, therefore we're giving them food that's, I know there's been a real circle of, if you go back 35, 40 years, maybe even longer, dogs were fed on scraps. Then dog food started coming in, and then we had this, this is human grade food that we're feeding the dog. When there's hunger and things, we've got to try and balance that. How is Tails trying to sort of square that circle?
Yeah, good question. Big topic, and it is a topic that I'm going to be doing a webinar with you guys on later in the year about sustainability in pet food and pet nutrition, and also another one on kind of the myths and misconceptions around pet food. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding because of the the bombardment of marketing and things, and the amount of pet food brands that are out there now
Yeah.
competing to shout loudest about why their pet food is good, or what I don't like, why other pet food is bad.
Yeah.
Negative marketing abounds. So that breeds misinformation and misunderstanding. I'd just start with saying that I moved from clinical life into industry life with Tails.com as their head vet 9 years ago now, and it's definitely been like the savior of my career, really, because it's allowed me the time to do other things outside of my veterinary work, which is where Ealing Wildlife Group came from, where my conservation career came from. But on the nutrition side of things, yeah, Tails.com was the first real, big commercial subscription pet food service, and doing very well. And our nutritional philosophy is that the most sustainable way that we can produce pet food is to utilize all of the ingredients from the human food chain that humans don't tend to eat, don't like
Yeah.
to eat, or find a little bit unsavory, or it's just not popular to eat them. So, offal comes and goes, and the parts of the meat that aren't pure breast meat or muscle meat, or fillet steaks, all the parts of the food animal that has been produced for the human food chain. And the entire animal, by the way, is human grade food or human grade meat. That human grade meat comes off the human food chain and comes onto the animal food chain. And that's biologically appropriate if we want to start using the kind of like raw feeding, faddish terminology. It's nutritionally dense, it's tasty, it's delicious, it's parts of the animal that we should be feeding to our pets, because otherwise it would go into landfill or biofuel, or
Yeah.
be just wasted right into the bin. So there's lots of trends going around about how can we produce food more sustainably for our pets. Let's explore insect protein. Let's explore vegan diets. That's all well and good, but the abundance of food that we produce for ourselves and that we waste, I think, but depending on the studies, it's upwards of 35-40% in most studies looking at food waste globally. In this country, I think it's upwards of 45% in the latest study that came out. And that's shocking. That's really, really bad for the planet. One of the worst things for the planet is food production after, fossil fuels. So I think, yeah, at Tails.com, our nutritional philosophy is we utilize human grade food, which comes from animals destined for the human food chain, and the parts of the animal that the human food chain doesn't utilize. And that's a very, very sustainable practice. It's probably the most sustainable choice. If you get into like the likes of insect protein, and I'm not knocking it, I think we do need new technologies. We need to be discovering ways to do this in many ways. Insect protein and vegan protein diets, for example, very good for animals with allergies, to some of the more common ingredients. So there's a place for all these things, but I think jumping aboard some of the kind of faddish human food production trends and saying that they're planet friendly, whilst ignoring what traditional pet food does, which is utilize perfectly good meat and animal
Yeah. Which would
byproducts.
get thrown away or wasted.
Yeah, they're called legally, they're termed byproducts, and byproducts or meat and animal derivatives are two legal labeling terms. That's all they are, but they're not describing like awful, horrible ingredients we're trying to hide from you as big pet food industry. They're describing just the jumble of parts of that animal that we can put into pet food and label it accordingly. It's not a bad word. Byproducts and meat and animal derivatives are perfectly good food from human grade animals. So there's a lot of words and language thrown around to try and mislead. And I would always say dogs are scavenging omnivores. They have evolved away from the wolf ancestor that they shared with the current grey wolf, and they've evolved the ability to digest plant starches because they came around us and sort of domesticated themselves when we became agriculturalists and started growing cereals.
Yeah.
So we don't need to feed our scavenging omnivore pets, which controversially are, a bit of a Western luxury to have. We don't need to feed them fillet steak. I think that's the take-home message, is that we should be utilizing what's in the food chain to use it up and not waste it.
I think, having said all of those things, my wife, not a cat lover, but obviously I love animals, and also is allergic to cats and dogs.
Oh
So
dear.
it made it really difficult. It's the old thing with vets. You tell people you're a vet and they go, oh, that's lovely. And then they tell you about their scabby cat and you have to help with that.
Yeah.
The third question is always, what animals do you have? And if you come back and say, well, I don't have any animals, that is, your credibility is completely shattered. So I loved it when Purina brought out Live Clear, which is obviously the diet that helps to make the cat hypoallergenic to the human. And they don't,
Yeah,
in my view, market it very well because I think it sits in between things. And I've talked to them on a number of occasions because it's been a really miraculous thing. Because obviously I've been able to bring a cat who adopted us, his little bells going, they may come on
yeah,
to the podcast at some point. But he adopted us during the pandemic. He's now nearly 19. And my wife has gone from being, ambivalent, not hating animals or anything, but, not that bothered about a cat, to now becoming a mad cat woman. So, as much as potentially we can say they're a luxury, again, within the mental health area, just that simple action of stroking a cat or a dog, the number of times Buddy will come up and I'm tapping away doing emails beyond when I should be doing them, and he sits on in front of the computer or he sits on my lap and he says, basically, you are now done.
yeah, yeah.
If you
It's my
try and
time.
write another email, I will grab you. I mean, luckily he's got no teeth now, so he gives you a bit of a gumming, not a biting, but he will tell you in no, in very clear terms that he now wants your attention. And actually, that whole kind of mindfulness,
Yeah,
just relaxing in the present moment is
no, totally.
incredibly important, isn't it?
I mean, I say it a bit flippantly just to try and
Yeah,
like
of
get
course,
us analyzing like actually pet ownership in general. Let's look at it. Like let's look at the billions and billions of pounds or dollars, whatever way you want to look at it, that we spend on pet ownership in the Western world and
yes,
in the global South. You know, this huge lack of investment and lack of money in clean water and food for children. Like, you know what I mean? So
of course,
I say it slightly flippantly, but obviously the mental well-being benefits and emotional benefits and things of pet ownership are also huge and are saving, you know, the NHS money. You know, we've done studies and surveys on that at tails.com to look at the human animal bond, and it is phenomenal. So as with anything, Anthony, you know, we live in a world where everything's very polarized and it's all black and white, and you're either on this side or this side of an argument, but there's a huge amount of nuance and grayscale in
yes.
between, isn't there? Yeah.
Well, as I've become greyer and greyer, I've realised that the world is grey. So, that
Yeah.
part of the reason also.
I'm joining you, Anthony.
I
I'm
know
joining
you're getting there, but that part of the reason of also setting up the Veterinary Green Discussion Forum is because these sort of conversations, as you've said, which says, well, actually, we shouldn't have any cows, we should just have all vegan diets. But we know that cows, you put them out onto pasture and they improve biodiversity. They also sequester carbon, with their feces, improve
you.
the pasture. The pasture is sequestering carbon. I think when we try and simplify something as complex as Mother Earth,
Yeah.
and we are, heading for a bruising, aren't we? Because we're not understanding it. And I don't have a great understanding of the environment, but I have enough of an understanding to know that simple statements aren't going to solve the problem. It's a very complex situation that we're dealing with.
It is, and these like really polarizing, you know, viewpoints that you know, if we use the veganism argument that, you know, veganism will save the planet and meat is murder, it's like you're losing a whole lot of science and nuance there. And actually you're getting away from how the planet operates. Like
Hmm.
we need herbivores to convert plant material into energy and capture carbon, and that whole cycle can't work. If the whole world turned vegan tomorrow, we'd be in big trouble because you cannot produce mass plant monocultures without animal inputs, you know, for
Yeah.
fertility and building soil and all the rest. So I'm a big fan of the phrase, you know, it's not the cow, it's the how. And certainly when people vilify eating a steak or a burger is bad for the planet, that does apply to, you know, intensive beef lot systems in North and South America, or clearing the Amazon for soy production for livestock feed, things like that. Yes, that does apply. But actually, regenerative farming with native herbivores like cattle, you know, the cattle ancestor, the aurochs, was widespread across the UK and Britain and Europe and Ireland. You know, that is something that we need to start reinstating in our food systems. That actually, let's get back to learning from and mimicking natural processes and natural cycles instead of this crazy adventure we went on in the last 150, 200 years of industrial scale agriculture and intensification of agriculture that worked really against nature and has caused so many of the problems that we're facing now.
Fertilization, nitrogen and phosphates going into the River Wye, killing it. It's all
Run,
those sort
yeah,
of
yeah,
areas where I think my wife often says it, everything in moderation. So I
absolutely,
don't eat as much meat, and if I eat meat, I want to eat meat that has come from an animal that's had a good life and a good death. That's all vets should want that, obviously. And so we have to make sure that we're coming in and making sure that the welfare of those animals is spot on. And intensive can do that, but of course, then intensive potentially can have an impact on environment. But even that, sometimes there's an argument with the farmers where if you're just looking at it from a carbon perspective, an extensive system can be more, some ways of measuring it shows that that's more carbon
yeah,
intensive than
yeah.
doing your agriculture, intensively.
Yeah, and I think to your point on like eating less meat, that is something that we can all do. And I heard the phrase, I can't remember where, but it's brilliant. It's like nobody needs a double quarter pounder with cheese.
Yeah,
Why do we need that? That's just gluttony, and that's a part of food waste. So we think of food waste as just what we throw in the bin, but actually we can eat a quarter pounder or a quarter pounder with cheese, but do we need to make it a double quarter pounder with cheese?
yeah,
Because excess calories is also wasteful. It's also an animal welfare issue. It's also a planet issue, and it's a human health issue because
yeah.
we're dealing in a time in obesity and diabetes and everything else on the rise. So nobody needs a quarter pounder with cheese, double quarter pounder with cheese. And yeah, I think sustainable meat. I eat meat. I try to make good choices. I don't eat a lot of it. I certainly eat less than I used to. But on this Saturday, I'm going to our local community farm, who are one of the project partners in the Beaver Project, and 15 of us or 20 of us are getting around a fire and we're cooking a muntjac, which is a non-native deer species that has a huge impact on local ecology and woodland regeneration. To me now, eating venison is welfare positive. That animal has led a natural life. It's very humane because it's been shot and killed instantly in the wild. It didn't know what was coming. It wasn't at a slaughterhouse. It's ecologically positive because they're damaging to the local ecosystems. They're non-native, so not meant to be here. So it's a wild, sustainable source of meat that's healthy, lower in trans fats and things like that. So that's the kind of meat that I think we should all be eating. And if we all switch that one thing to say 50% of our meat consumption needs to come from venison now as a consumer trend, there'd be huge positive impacts on British ecology for that.
I remember reading in one of the many eco books I've read over the last few years about there being about 2 million too many deer in the country who obviously strip the trees, kill the trees. We're not getting that reforestation. But I also, as a young boy, Sean, used to go to the pictures and watch Bambi.
Yeah,
And so it tugged on my heartstrings a bit. And then actually, as I started to think about it, I realized, venison is, as you say, a really good option. It's why the first 2 years when we were in Brockholes, our main meal was venison. And as you
yeah,
say, it's naturally good. I was speaking to a lady from one of the big pharmaceutical companies only yesterday about that whole piece around, if you're creating a drug, a diabetes drug, do you want to sell more of that? Or do you also have a responsibility to actually look at why are we having this epidemic of diabetes
yeah.
that ruins people's lives? You lose a leg, you lose whatever, you lose sight.
Your eyesight, yeah.
We have to have a more holistic approach than just you're going to be diabetic by the time you're 45. There you go. We're going to sell you a bottle of insulin, every month for the rest of
Yeah.
your life.
Is it any wonder, that Big Pharma has, a PR problem? If you go to the States and you see them pushing on TV, ask your doctor for this drug and ask your doctor
Yeah.
for that drug and ask your doctor for this drug to counteract the side effects of that drug. And, we've lost our way.
We have to put, because I was going to say, we've talked about the individual. I think the individual, I can only really impact myself. Then companies obviously can have a huge effect. We're then moving into government, and it is that whole, again, holistic approach. But governments move very slowly.
Short
Certainly
power
in the
cycles.
UK, we're not seeing, I think we are one of the more forward thinking, but it's still slow, isn't it?
It's very slow. And unfortunately, it's these short power cycles of 4 years or 8 years, and people want to achieve the things that are low hanging fruit or that will gain them the most power or the most positive sentiment, for their reputation as they leave power. It's not set up to be doing big things. And we see this at the likes of COP26. I sailed to COP26 to bring the sound of
Yes.
ocean health to COP26, and I was quite disappointed going to that, because all these global leaders putting targets and saying we're going to do this by 2030 and we're going to do this by 2045 or 2050, and then we're literally seeing governments, including our own, taking back and
Rowing
saying
back.
that's not achieved, so we've dropped that target now. And it's just like words, and it's
Yeah.
cheap words coming out of their mouths to be saying the right thing, but they don't have ambition for the next 30 years because they're not going to be in power in that time.
Hmm.
So yeah, we I don't know what the answer is, Anthony. It's a big issue, but
I think it's individuals and it's business that will solve a lot of the problem because, as you say, that politicians are populist on the whole.
yeah,
They're short term. If you look at something like the Mars family that we're working a bit with, if you have money behind you and you can have a longer vision rather than looking at 2 years or 5 years or whatever, or you're a big company that just believes in it, you can actually start to look at what you do. I'm just reading a book by Paul Polman, ex Unilever, and he said, first of all, we're not going to report to our investors quarterly
okay,
because it's just too short term.
yeah,
So we're just going to stop doing it. And actually, he grew that company massively in the 10 years that he was CEO because there's a lot of people out there who, given the choice and it's not hugely more expensive, would rather buy from an ethical company than an unethical one, wouldn't they?
they would. And to your point on business, well, actually strip it back a bit more. What do businesses need? They need customers.
Hmm.
So actually, the power is in our hands as customers and consumers to say, we're not going to buy your product anymore unless you do X, Y, and Z. So I think there is a lot of power in that. And I think, I can't remember the exact stats on it, but there was a graph that I saw recently, and it was talking about behavioral change and societal kind of patterns shifting. There's something like a critical mass of 1.7% of the early adopters starting to change consumer behavior, only need to double. I think it was like to 3 point something percent
Hmm.
maybe. Then you start to see a huge exponential
Yeah.
rise in that consumer behavior changing. So we're seeing the early shoots of that. We're seeing people taking back control and taking back power and saying, I want to shop responsibly, I want to shop less, I want to shop
Yeah.
in a way that's more planet friendly. So I think we're on the cusp of the people being back in power, and we need to exert that on not only politicians but also businesses.
I think finally that whole idea, I'm very much into symbols. And, I remember because I was at COP26
Yeah,
with you, I went slightly more conventionally on the train.
yeah. I'd recommend that. A month on a catamaran sailing
I
in
think you were a
November
bit
wasn't good.
seasick, weren't you?
Yeah,
But we had a prime minister who turned up on his private jet to a climate conference. So I think symbolism is really important that we do try and walk our talk. And sometimes if we're doing something that seems controversial, then we have to be able to bothered enough to explain it. Whereas I don't think they were bothered about it, were they? So
no,
yeah, it's interesting. We definitely are seeing a rowing back, but I think it's interesting now. I think big companies are understanding that there needs to be change as well, and I think the governments will eventually catch up.
yeah, fingers crossed.
That's the hope.
Yeah,
Sean, you know how inspirational I think you are. That evening that we had was fantastic with the beavers. I'm really going to hope I can get down in the next month. I know I'm going through London in about 3 weeks' time. I'm Caminoing
oh, are you?
week, so we're just for people. We're in April. We're just before Easter. I've had my sciatica. It's still there a bit, but I'm going to try and do about 120 kilometers in 6 days. So we'll see how I get on.
Amazing.
And then I'm back for a bit and trying to get down to the south of France to Recce, where we're going to be holding the Veterinary Green Discussion Forum in June. So those of you who listen to this in 2026, you won't know what I'm talking about, but I will be coming through London, so maybe that's the time to come and have a look. It may be too late.
No, but yeah, let's talk dates. I think if it's early May, we might be all right. But
We'll do okay.
hot off the press, I think if this is going out later, we're all right to say it. I'm actually in Ireland in early May because I'm filming another bit for BBC Springwatch. So yeah,
We will watch out. You can let
updates.
us know when all these things are happening, Sean, so we can do a bit of social media, because social media can be a good thing as well as a bad thing, can't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think social media has brought me a lot of connections, and it's brought me a lot of opportunities, and it's been a way. Back in the day when I was, my handle on Twitter was Exotic Pet Vet, and I was posting case studies and things there. It is a way to reach a lot of people and
Yeah,
to have an influence, I suppose, and to try and be part of a discussion that like moves things along
makes a difference.
and make again building that community that I talk about. Feeling connected to people who share your values and stuff is really important in a kind of increasingly disconnected world, isn't it?
Sean, it's you're a great connector. And as I say, I still remember that with the beavers and the bats as well. The bats were fantastic. So
Yeah,
we will watch out for Spring Watch.
great. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, let me know when you're down, and we'll try and find some others.
Fantastic, Sean. Thank you so much again. Always great to speak to you. And thanks everyone for listening, and hopefully see you on a podcast. I know this went on a bit longer than usual, but if you put a Scouser and Irishman together, then it's always going to go longer.
There's
So
no stopping us.
apologies for that, but we're looking forward to seeing you on a podcast or a webinar very soon. Take